power continued. You see, because I find that nuclear power is simply too broad of a topic to be narrowly decided. Yes, it should be terminated. No, it should not. When you say should it be continued, that leaves space for room. It leaves room for my opinion, which, as throughout my research, has evolved to become that nuclear power should not be terminated. However, at the same time, I don't believe it should be continued either. I have a quick presentation. But so yeah, against nuclear continuation. First, I'm going to be showing the sides against nuclear continuation. Here, we see the diagram on the right provides a basic visualization of 3 of the largest nuclear accidents currently known to date. Chernobyl being the largest one at the bottom left. It actually created a 30-kilometer evacuation zone surrounding it, with hundreds of thousands of people displaced and many thousands killed in this terrible event. One thing that all 3 of these accidents have in common is that not a single one of these nuclear power plants were up to code. Which is truly a tragedy because that means that all of these accidents were preventable. To date, not a single nuclear power plant that was up to code has had any accident, which I believe is very important when considering this topic. So for those of you that don't know, Chernobyl was a nuclear accident that occurred in Ukraine in 1986. It released many tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere, creating fallout over, creating a lot of fallout over northern Europe. I feel like a weatherman. Over here, you see a slight chance of radioactive showers. Bring an umbrella, because if you don't, then you can die. As you see in the chart on the right, it truly is a tragedy. The thyroid cancer incidence in Ukrainian young children increased nearly tenfold over a year, which is very tragic when you think about the fact that all of this was definitely preventable. Fukushima. For those of you who live under a rock, Fukushima was a natural disaster, technically a natural disaster. It was a radioactive disaster which occurred in Fukushima, Japan, following an earthquake. One of the nuclear power plant released significant amounts of radiation into the surrounding environment. However, due to very careful extreme risk aversion and nuclear containment policies, the government actually managed to decrease the amount. There was very little exposure of radiation to the general public. However, they did not take the same initiative to address the mental illness and the trauma which is associated with experiences such as nuclear fallout, or such as nuclear, the trauma in the region. One thing which has definitely occurred is there's pervasive mental illness in the region, meaning that for the hundreds of thousands of people that were displaced by this event, many of them saw themselves definitely traumatized and experiencing significant psychological issues. Here what you see is, actually this dates back, I believe, to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Following the atomic bombs in the region, there has been significant fear of genetic and delayed effects. What you see here is a graph, which represents a survey that researchers conducted on the people of Japan. And what they found is that they were far less afraid of the immediate effects of nuclear disaster, but far more afraid of the genetic effects and the delayed effects and the long-term effects, which definitely adds to the trauma of the region. The fuel source for nuclear power. As you know, it's generally uranium or plutonium, which must be mined. Since nearly 2/3 of the world's uranium deposits actually lay in Native American lands, it is generally actually Native Americans who end up mining this material, which would be good if not for the fact that they, as you see here, they're not wearing the proper material, the proper safety material, and their lungs and hands are exposed to radioactive dust, which leaches into their lungs and has increased cancer rates for miners so high that anywhere from 1/5 to 1/2 of miners who take part in uranium mining end up developing lung cancer, which is truly a tragedy. However, this isn't even the worst part of it all. The worst part of it all is this radioactive dust often leaves the mines during the mining process and affects surrounding communities, even leaching into the groundwater, which has very detrimental effects to women and children in the surrounding areas. However, nuclear power plants, they don't just affect the environment through radiation, they also affect it through thermal pollution. The basic idea of a nuclear power plant is that water isn't taken from one end, as you see in this diagram on the left. Water isn't taken at a low temperature. It's pumped past a moderator, which sits in between the fissile uranium, which gets very hot and moderate. So the water flows past the moderator and it leaves at a higher temperature, which then spins a turbine and creates electricity. This is all fine and good, but the problem with this is as the water leaves at a higher temperature, this water is then just released back into the environment. What you see here is an aerial view, which has been enhanced with thermal imaging of Ilha Grande Bay in Brazil. What you see right there is a nuclear power plant, and the outflow is just released back into the water. So when it's released back into the water, a group of researchers found that while the power plant wasn't operating, which would be this area right here, in theory, the temperature of the surrounding region would be anywhere from 24.4 to 28.4 degrees Celsius. But while the nuclear power plant was in operation, the water ranged from 29.5 to 36.5 degrees Celsius, which is nearly a 5 degrees Celsius increase. This may sound small, but when you take a look at the numbers, as the temperature of the water heats up, the solubility of oxygen in the water actually decreases, meaning that basically fish are unable to breathe, as well as algae, root formations, and the kinds of bacteria that can survive in that area generally are of anaerobic and heat-resistant strains. And this is not limited to Brazil. This is definitely a worldwide phenomenon. As you see here, thermal stress on coral reefs has increased significantly worldwide, ranging from nearly 50% in the Atlantic, 30% in Australia, 30% in Australia, about 50% in the Indian Ocean, 35% in the Middle East, 40% in the Pacific, about 30% in Southeast Asia, and nearly 38% worldwide. However, despite all the issues for nuclear power, proponents against continuation of nuclear power argue that there are viable alternatives to nuclear power, one of which being offshore wind farms. Author Keith Burnham argues that in terms of the Hinkley Point C nuclear power, he argues against the construction of the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant. The Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant is a nuclear power plant in the United Kingdom, which is currently set to cost about $8 billion and won't even be operational until 2023. However, through Keith Barnum's plan, he proposed the use of offshore wind farms instead, which he estimates would cost about $4.2 billion to create, nearly half as much, and would be fully operational in about 2 years. So there would be much quicker implementation and a far better long-term plan. Just recently, actually a few days ago, Tesla released information that they actually were able to create, they were able to make an island self-sustainable through solar power. Generally, this island, the Tau Island and the Samoa, American Samoa, they have to import thousands and thousands, or you'll see in the show, or in the video, but they have to import thousands of gallons of diesel in order to operate generators. However, now, as a result of Tesla, they are completely self-reliant. Now, this is an amazing accomplishment by Tesla, specifically because they hope to use it as a milestone for what can possibly be done on a large scale, on a global scale, in terms of solar power. This was simply a small-scale demonstration of the power of solar. Now I'm going to be deconstructing the side for nuclear continuation. Climate change mitigation. Many proponents of nuclear power argue that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, nuclear power keeps going on, which are two problems that have very much so crippled renewable energy generation in the past. So first I'm going to start out by defining climate change mitigation. What climate change mitigation means is that essentially breaks down into the efforts which people are making to combat climate change. Now, in order to do this, we're going to have to increase the use of energy sources which have very low carbon outputs, and also energy sources, and decrease the use of power plants such as coal power plants and gas-powered power plants. One country is actually attempting nuclear termination themselves, but it's a projected failure. This country is Switzerland, as you can see, and which is very surprising considering that 40% of their 40% of their energy is actually relied upon by nuclear power. And this is a large deficit of energy, and if they're going to attempt nuclear termination, then analysts believe that they're going to have to significantly increase the energy production in other sectors. However, they're actually finding that in other sectors, such as hydroelectric power, this energy production is actually going to just decrease. A majority of their electricity is actually generated, nearly 20% of their electricity is generated by hydroelectric power, which occurs when the ice caps on the Alps melt, and then that water in spring flows down the mountain, which is then collected by a dam, and energy is created. However, with the input of climate change, with the onset of climate change, they're finding that these ice caps are getting smaller and smaller, which is decreasing the future possibility for hydroelectric energy generation. Also, the price of uranium is predicted to be very stable. So, whereas the price of coal and similar other energy generation sources are predicted to fluctuate tremendously. The energy, or the cost of uranium is projected to stay nearly the same. Until 2030, it's projected to stay within the range of $85 to $105 per kilogram. This plateau is very significant in terms of nuclear power because one of the biggest problems which nuclear power currently faces is actually the economic issues associated with it. However, if the price remains constant, then that means that nuclear power is an economic solution. There's also been many scientific advances in the realm of nuclear power. ALMR, which you see here, stands for Advanced Liquid Metal Reactor. The way an advanced liquid metal reactor works is essentially it boils down old radioactive material and reuses it in a new process, which has been found to increase the energy per weight of uranium by nearly 100-fold. This also works to reduce the half-life of spent nuclear fuel rods and is excellent in terms of the environment. Over the years, many scientists have been dreaming about the day when a fusion reactor will be fully successful. According to some researchers, that may not be centuries away, but rather decades. What a fusion reactor essentially is rather than using fusion power, which breaks apart energy in a very radioactive sense, a fusion reactor fuses very basic and very common elements such as hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium, and it creates essentially unlimited power for the cost of water. It's very safe in the sense that while it may have to heat up to nearly 150 million degrees Celsius, if there is any issue with the plant, it is encased in literally yards of cement and steel reinforcements, so it will be very well protected due to safeguards. And it also presents another option for very low carbon output energy source. So for my judgment reflection, I believe that nuclear power should not be terminated. It should be continued, but it should not be continued. In lieu of the construction of Hinkley Point C reactor, I believe that nuclear power should be used in union with solar energy, because currently it's not a one-way street. You can definitely have both, which will work together on a global scale to reduce climate change. However, immediate reform must definitely be taken. In terms of the humanitarian concerns for miners of uranium, there must be safeguards and humanitarian laws put into place to protect their well-being. Solutions, I believe that through my research I found that we must also utilize different cooling systems for nuclear power. Perhaps loop the water, rather than sending it right back out into the environment and harming the aquatic ecosystems, you should send this water into a cooling area where it can let off excess steam and excess heat so as to keep the environment safe. We should also increase the use of advanced liquid metal reactors in order to reduce the half-life of spent nuclear fuel. Thank you.
So what was your position before you started your research?
Before I started my research, I wasn't entirely certain on my position, because on one hand, I knew that nuclear power puts out a lot of energy, but at the same time it has definitely its own safety detriments. But to break it down, yes, I thought nuclear power should be terminated.
Great. And I also have to commend you on your understanding and mastery of the material. The way that you conveyed it was beyond. So good job with that. The last thing was I found the Tesla-powered island to be very interesting. Nothing I had seen. I know you said it came out a few days ago, but I was just wondering what was the cost of it now with the solar-powered energy versus what it was when it was powered with fuel. What was the cost difference?
Well, one thing that I know is I'm very certain that Tesla I know Tesla worked together with the main energy provider of the island, so they sort of had a deal, and the way that it ended up working out is when the monthly electric bill comes in from the island, a portion of that goes to Tesla. But really, I think that leads to the broader point that solar power, I believe that solar power should also be privatized. Whereas nuclear power cannot, it must be federalized for obvious reasons, safety, and the sheer cost of it. Solar power must be privatized, and I believe they did an excellent job with maintaining the costs and managing the costs.
Great, thank you so much.
I'd have to concur with Courtney here. I think you did a wonderful job. Your knowledge of the topic is just phenomenal. I learned a lot from just listening to your whole presentation, so kudos to you. A couple questions as well. My first one is, why did you choose this topic? Does it have some sort of interest to you, or your mechanical engineering field, or that you want to go into, or an explanation with that?
Yes, I definitely, well, on one sense I wanted to sort of pick a topic that not many other people were like thinking about, and nuclear power is so commonplace, but at the same time, not like when you think about nuclear power, do you really think about the debate behind it? You know, if anything, you more so think about the radiation, but there's so much more to it than just radiation, which I found so interesting. There's also humanitarian concerns, there's economic concerns, and also with my hopeful background in mechanical engineering, I thought that it would definitely be useful to have background knowledge of it for the future.
Great, thank you. My other question also is pricing. Reading your paper and then watching your presentation and seeing the alternatives such as the wind farms and the solar panels, and you were talking about varying prices. I mean, how much of a varying price would that be compared to knowing what the nuclear cost would be?
So the price difference between like renewable energy and nuclear power?
Exactly, yeah.
So basically, the thing with that is solar energy, and I'm just going to say solar energy. Solar energy is very cost efficient compared to nuclear power. It's a lot cheaper to put in solar panels than it is to put up a nuclear power plant. However, one way that they've battled these very high costs of nuclear power plants is that they've begun creating smaller ones. And rather than having one big one for a massive area, they'll create a lot of small ones throughout a larger area. And hopefully one day they're planning to, this is slightly extreme, straight from Back to the Future, but they're hoping to be able to utilize fusion power in cars and stuff like that, essentially making a car run forever. Sorry, I'm straying, but back to your question. Solar power is definitely a lot cheaper, but nuclear power is a better long-term investment.
That's great. Thank you again.
Very well done. You really drew connections. You were very clarifying with all that information, and your knowledge of the subject was evident. You guys took some of my questions, but one of the questions I had, you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation about the 3 plant failures, and they weren't up to code. What in your research did you find about the governing boards protecting people and ensuring that nuclear power plants are up to code, and how do they vary from country to country?
That's a very good question. My research extended somewhat into it. Like I know that they are definitely creating new methods of monitoring nuclear power. They're doing one way, it's, pardon me if I get it wrong, but it's acoustic Doppler radio envision, like a radar system in the nuclear power plant. And basically what it does is it sends a radio waves throughout the plant so that they can essentially scan the plant while it's going on. If they see anything going wrong, they can fix it right away. They're they're practicing with that. As for the governing boards, that's very highly regulated, and which I think is truly the beauty of it. If the plant is truly up to code, then there should never be any nuclear accident associated with it.
Thank you. And I'm just curious, with fusion, how do you get it hot enough?
That's a very good question. So nuclear fusion, it has to get very hot. So essentially what they do, go back to my slide on it. As you can see here, they have this large ring, basically donut shaped, and they create a vacuum in this ring. And then what you see there is those are all magnets, and they magnetically levitate the hydrogen in this vacuum, and that way, and then they shoot radio waves at the matter that's in the vacuum, and that way, since it's in a vacuum, it can't disperse energy out into the walls of the situation. And then they just increase the use of light waves, which then heats it up to 150 million degrees Celsius.
Thank you very much.
Hey Mike, great job on your presentation, super proud of you. I'm not sure that I would have been able to resist the temptation to add a Homer Simpson picture or reference or something. I wanted to ask your opinion. You stated that you think solar energy should be privatized. Why?
I believe solar energy, that's a very good question. I believe solar energy should be privatized on one hand because of the cost. Solar energy is so much cheaper than nuclear power, and if it's privatized, then it's also going to potentially be used on a smaller scale. One day in the distant future, it would be fantastic if every household could be run off of solar power, which if you just put solar panels on the rooftop, that would drastically decrease the energy usage of the globe. So I believe that if you get that by privatizing it, you also have more ability for innovation, because then there's competition. You're battling against other solar manufacturers, you're trying to make something cheaper, you're trying to make it better. Whereas if it's federalized, then it's all very standard.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the panel? Well, we always turn to our audience and see if we have any questions from the audience.
Great presentation. Michael, I wanted to know, in the course of your research, did you cover any of the newer innovations in nuclear technologies, such as the proposed thorium reactors?
Yes, I stumbled across it a little bit. One thing that I know, I remember seeing like a couple of YouTube videos that are like, oh, get a thorium-powered car, it'll run for 80 years. That obviously claims like those are scams, so don't send your money there. But but there's definitely new innovations every single day. They're just recently with the use of the advanced liquid metal reactor, they found a way to recycle spent nuclear fuel, which is an amazing technology which can not only decrease the half-life of spent nuclear fuel, but also create high amounts of energy from what is basically waste fuel.
Okay, now given the ability of these new kinds of reactors to produce reliable nuclear energy while significantly decreasing the cost of fuel and decreasing the potential negative environmental effects, you would still recommend that we discontinue research or building of these new types of nuclear power plants?
That's a good question. I don't believe I properly clarified that. So I believe for standard nuclear power plants, which use new uranium and burn through it and then send it off to some containment facility, as opposed to doing that, I believe we should just utilize advanced liquid metal reactors and burn up all of the nuclear warheads that we have sitting around, in the closet, and boil back on some of those environmental concerns, as opposed to creation of more nuclear waste.
All right, any other questions from the audience?
Good job, Mike.
Thanks, Glenn.
Compared between the both power sources, which one would be able to create more jobs and open up more economic things like that?
That is an excellent question. I think both have definitely. Good job, man. I definitely think that they both have potential for jobs. They're seeing all these new green jobs popping up across the nation, where for large firms such as Solar City and Tesla, they're implanting they're implanting solar farms over massive spans of land, which obviously creates a lot of which offers a job for uprooted manufacturing from people who were fired from manufacturing jobs. So then they're able to go out and they're able to build these solar farms. This is also evident with, actually this is not so evident with nuclear power plants, because you require significant education and extensive background screening in order to be able to work on a nuclear power plant. So definitely I believe that solar power would have much more job creation.
Great job, Mike. You talked about the Tesla and how they're making the solar farm. How much would it cost to implement those on a global scale?
So that's an excellent question. On a global scale, I believe it would definitely be in the billions. It would be in the multi-billions. But however, they're making new innovations every day. They're making solar panels more efficient, they're making them cheaper, and they're making them out of different materials. And this also provides an opportunity for energy for undeveloped countries. Just recently on my mission trip to Haiti, I found that it is very commonplace for people to use solar power because it's very hard to get oil, diesel, gas, coal out to that island because it has to all be shipped. So basically, while it is a very high investment, it's very useful on a global scale, if done over a long period of time.
Great job. I was wondering if you came across a release date for the Tesla power packs to the public, or are they keeping them private?
For that specific one, or for the power packs?
For the power packs.
Okay. That's it. My research didn't really extend into that. I do know though that Tesla engineers work about 90 hours a week, so it should be out pretty soon. I'd guess within a few months, or a year or so, to the general public.
All right, if there are no further questions from the audience or the panel, we thank you for a very good